the king who spent billions on a palace and bankrupted France. What if I told you he made today's billionaires look like beggars? You might not believe me, but listen closely to this story. What if I told you there was a king who built a palace worth $50 billion? For comparison, Elon Musk's most expensive known home cost under $20 million. Jeff Bezos's Beverly Hills estate cost roughly $165 million. At his peak, this king controlled the wealth of France directly. Adjusted for modern scale, this would be equivalent to controlling trillions of dollars, not billions. Elon Musk may be the richest individual today, but he does not control a nation's income, labor force, and resources. The king did not own a mansion. He built a city-sized palace that consumed a measurable percentage of his nation's economy. At his peak, one man spent more money than entire kingdoms earned. His palace consumed gold, marble, silk, and human labor on a scale never seen before and rarely matched since. Kings visited him as guests. Nobles competed just to watch him eat. This was Louis XIV of France, the Sun King. And today we are breaking down the most ridiculous, extravagant, and absurd displays of wealth ever owned by a single ruler. The $50 billion palace? Well, that's just the beginning. To call Louis XIV's residences houses would be the understatement of the century. Versailles was only one of his residences. Louis also maintained the Château de Marly, a private leisure palace built purely for pleasure, staffed year-round by servants and guards, despite being used only intermittently. He continued to reside at older royal palaces, such as Saint-Germain-en-Laye and Fontainebleau, each requiring full courts, kitchens, security, and ceremonial staff whenever he arrived. In modern terms, this would be like a single individual maintaining multiple billion-dollar estates, each operating like a small city, simultaneously. No modern billionaire lives like this. Louis XIV owned furniture made entirely of solid silver, not decorative plating, but functional tables, chairs, mirrors, and household objects meant for daily use. At its peak, this silver furniture alone is estimated to have weighed tens of tons. In modern terms, the raw metal value of these objects would be worth hundreds of millions of dollars, before craftsmanship, artistry, or historical significance are even considered. None furnish their homes with solid, precious metals, because even at today's extreme levels of wealth, it would be considered irrational extravagance. Today's billionaires may employ hundreds of staff, assistants, security, household workers. Louis XIV required thousands of people every single day, simply to function. For comparison, Instagram, a platform used by over 1 billion people worldwide, operates with fewer employees than Louis needed just to wake up, eat, and be seen. The stables required over 1,000 workers, including the royal stables were staffed by grooms, stable masters, saddle makers, harness specialists, farriers, veterinarians, trainers, and armed guards, all working daily to maintain horses used primarily for royal ceremony and prestige. Yes, individual horses had dedicated caretakers. Entire careers were spent maintaining animals whose sole purpose was to reflect royal prestige. There were officials responsible for holding the king's candle, presenting his clothing, guarding doors he might never use, and managing who was allowed to stand near him. Louis XIV hosted feasts designed for hundreds of courtiers at a time, often involving multiple courses that together amounted to well over 100 distinct dishes served in a single day. These meals required hundreds of kitchen staff, including specialized chefs, bakers, butchers, pastry makers, sauce cooks, servers, and food tasters, all working simultaneously across multiple kitchens. In modern terms, feeding a court of this size with comparable ingredients, staffing, and logistics would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars for a single day and well over $1 million for a major ceremonial feast. While modern billionaires dine privately, Louis turned eating itself into a public demonstration of wealth, one that required an army of people and a fortune in food every night. Imagine Jeff Bezos inviting a small city to dine with him at a five-star restaurant. That is the scale of Louis. Modern billionaires can buy almost anything, except absolute obedience. Louis XIV didn't just buy luxury, he bought submission. Entire noble families bankrupted themselves just to remain visible in his presence. No billionaire today has ever commanded wealth on that scale or control that complete. Louis XIV funded entertainment on a scale no European ruler had ever attempted. He sponsored massive operas and theatrical productions involving hundreds of performers, full orchestras, elaborate stage machinery, and hand-built sets that were often used only once. In modern terms, these events would be comparable to staging a full-scale Olympic opening ceremony, not once but repeatedly, funded by a single individual for personal prestige. A single royal opera could cost the modern equivalent of millions of dollars, especially when accounting for costumes woven with gold thread, custom music compositions, and weeks of rehearsals paid entirely by the crown. Louis also staged all-night fireworks displays that consumed vast quantities of gunpowder and labor, illuminating Versailles for hours while thousands of guests watched, spectacles that today would rival the cost of major national celebrations. For pure spectacle, he commissioned artificial naval battles, constructing temporary lakes and waterways where decorated ships fired cannons with live powder charges, crewed by hundreds of sailors and performers. This was at a time where warships were an important commodity, as were gunpowder, which he used for fireworks. Louis's demands could never be met with a no. That is the kind of wealth he had. He commissioned the Machine de Marly, a monstrous 17th-century pumping system on the Seine River. Considered the most complex mechanical marvel of its era, it used 14 massive water wheels, each approximately 38 feet in diameter, to drive over 250 pumps, lifting water nearly 180 meters uphill. It was insanely noisy, described as infernal by neighbors, required hundreds of workers running it 24/7, and still couldn't supply enough water for all the fountains at once. What was this brilliant peace engineering for, you ask? It was for the water fountains in front of his palace. Even at half pressure, the fountains guzzled more water per day than the entire city of Paris consumed. Whistles were blown to signal fountain keepers to turn jets on only as the king strolled by, then off again to conserve supply. A ridiculous game of fountain theater. The ongoing costs were astronomical. Maintenance alone ran equivalent to tens of thousands of dollars annually in today's money, with one observer noting the pumped water cost as much as wine. Thousands of workers reportedly died building the aqueducts and systems amid massive taxation that burdened the poor. All this for fleeting water shows that impressed visitors but drained the treasury, while much of France faced hardship. It perfectly captures Louis's vanity, turning a basic lack of water into a symbol of divine kingship at any ridiculous expense. King Louis's most expensive jewelry was a diamond called the French Blue Diamond, thought to be created by God himself, historically known as the only perfect blue diamond of that size to be ever found. Private collectors estimate its worth at 200 to 350 million US dollars in today's money. That is just one diamond he owned among a vast collection. The diamond was later lost after Louis's fall and has thought to have been cut into smaller pieces. Louis himself was not the alone spender in the palace. They say that if a rich man can spend a lot of money, a rich woman can spend 10 times he does. Louis had a wife, but it's his multiple mistresses who spent as much money as him and in equally ridiculous things. For example, one of his mistress, Madame de Montespan, lived openly at Versailles with lavish apartments, a large personal staff, and jewelry gifted directly by the king, receiving wealth and privileges that rivaled those of the queen herself. She was gifted estates, income streams, and jewels worth fortunes, while hosting gatherings and living surrounded by luxury paid for entirely by royal favor. In modern terms, it would be like a billionaire publicly funding multiple partners, each living at a level comparable to royalty, without secrecy, restraint, or apology. Louis XIV was rightfully called the Sun King. He had enough gold to shine as bright as the sun. Few rulers in history ever spent money on such a scale, and it is possible that no single individual has ever converted wealth into spectacle as completely as Louis did. But the same excess that made his reign dazzling also planted the seeds of collapse. Endless spending drained the treasury, burdened the population, and widened the distance between courtly luxury and everyday life in France. By the time Louis died, the nation was exhausted, indebted, and fragile. Within a generation, the golden world he built would give way to revolution, violence, and a dark reckoning with power itself. Versailles still stands today, not just as a monument to wealth, but as a warning of what happens when a kingdom spends as if the sun will never set.